That was Anton Karas, Third Man. I'm Randy Credico, live on the fly on 99.5 FM in New York City. Tomorrow is the anniversary, the 50-year anniversary of the uprising at Attica. And today we are going to speak with Fred Dicker, the 35 years as a journalist for the Post, as the state editor, 50 years as a journalist. He was actually not there, but he interviewed a lot of the prisoners that were transferred from Attica to other prisons. Way back, he was like 25 years old up at Great Meadows. And we're going to talk about that with Fred Dicker, along with what's happening with Cuomo and the gubernatorial race next year. Fred Dicker, dear friend of mine, and I used to be a regular on the show, Fred Dicker Live from Albany for about 12 years, 13 years. So since tomorrow is the anniversary of Attica, there will be events, virtual events, on both Thursday the 9th and Sunday the 13th. If you would like to participate, go to atticaisallofus.org. Atticaisallofus.org. Go online, get involved, engage in panel discussions, listen or whatever, but this is really worthwhile. Go to atticaisallofus.org, and it's really going to be a remarkable two-day affair. That being said, what else is happening? October 1st, Steve Donziger is to be sentenced by Judge Loretta Preska, Chevron Judge Loretta Preska, 500 Pearl Street. Please be there 8 o'clock in the morning. Show your support. I will be there. I know that Roger Waters will be there, and so will Susan Sarandon and a whole bunch of others. So that's October 1st at 8 a.m. Now, one last thing. Stand Up for Assange, October 16th and 23rd. Comedian Lee Camp, myself, pianist, ragtime great Terry Waldo are all participating in a two-day tour, DC on the 16th and New York City on the 23rd. If you want more information, please email me at credico2014@gmail.com or AssangeCountdown@gmail.com. We are continuing our show, Assange Countdown to Freedom. It is every Monday on Progressive Radio Network. That's prn.fm. All right. I think we're going to have to get right into this. This is Humoresque by the great Anton Dvorak, and we'll be right back with the great Fred Dicker. Okay, that was Anton Dvorak, Humoresque. I'm Randy Credico live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City, WBAI.org. And I'm so excited. I have Fred Dicker. Fred Dicker, who has been a journalist for 50 years plus. He's received many awards here in the state of New York. For 35 years, he was the bureau chief, the state editor, all of it for the New York Post up in Albany. I had the good fortune of being the official comedian of the Fred Dicker Show for about 10 or 12 years. And he and I have become very good friends. He's the smartest guy I know in the state of New York in the field of journalism. And there's no one like him. Fred Dicker, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Randy. It's great to be back with you, and greetings from Albany.
Yeah, so you're up in Albany. Tell us about life in Albany with the restrictions, the COVID, briefly, because we don't want to get bogged down with it.
Well, it's pretty much what you'd find anywhere else, except we have a new governor. And of course, the talk of Kathy Hochul is everybody's talk when it comes to politics. It's been 2 weeks or so that she's been governor. Andrew Cuomo is not missed.
No, I know. I would take, if Satan was there, he would not be missed. We both have our problems for a long time with Andrew Cuomo. Fred Dicker today, well, Well, today is a day before the 50-year anniversary of the situation up there in Attica, the uprising and then the repression and all of that. You actually won an award, you and your colleagues, the Frank Tripp Memorial Award. What was it like, Fred? Tell us about that whole situation, even though you weren't in Attica, but you certainly were following it.
Well, I was a new reporter at the Saratoga newspaper, the Saratogian, which was part of the Gannett chain. And at the time, Randy, Gannett was headquartered in Rochester, which was right near the Attica prison uprising. And when the uprising took place, the Gannett papers were all over the story. In fact, two reporters at the Gannett Rochester paper won a Pulitzer Prize for their coverage. I was brought in, I was a new reporter, because many of the inmates from Attica who had been involved in the uprising were transferred out of Attica when the uprising was over and sent to other prisons, including one right near where I was working, near the Saratogian. And I was dispatched up to the Great Meadow Correctional Facility in Comstock, Washington County. And I was, I believe, the first reporter to interview any of the surviving inmates from Attica, and I interviewed them up there.
What was that like, Fred? What was your impression? How many days, how much time did you spend with those former Attica prisoners?
Well, let me say, 1971, in a way like today, Randy, I'm sure you'd agree, we had a very divided country. Things were very, very tense, whether it was the Vietnam War or whether it was Richard Nixon being president, whether it was the Manson trial that just had gone on and the Manson murders in California. We had the weathermen setting off bombs. In fact, one of the weathermen or someone affiliated with him, Sam Melville, was involved in the uprising at Attica, as you well know. So it was a tense time. We had in the area where I was working, many corrections officers, and they were obviously very concerned about what had happened at Attica. When I went up to this prison, the Great Meadow Correctional Facility, it was extremely tense. And I remember being, and understandably so, carefully checked for any contraband that I might have. The correction officers looked very, very nervous. And when I did speak to several inmates, they were scared. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. They were concerned about retaliation, or had already been some retaliation against inmates. So the whole thing, for a pretty young reporter, was very intense, very disturbing. It was an international story, as you know. I mean, it was a great tragedy in the history of the United States.
Yes, we are talking with Fred Dicker, one of my dearest friends and one of the greatest journalists ever to walk anywhere in Albany, the state of New York. He's from the Bronx. Fred is from the Bronx. And Fred, you're familiar with the station WBAI, I suppose, because you actually graduated at, I believe, at Long Island University. Am I right?
You're right. And when growing up in New York, I was an SDS activist, a Congress of Racial Equality activist, and I knew a good deal about WBAI. I listened to it all the time. It was a very unique station, especially back then, and it's still unique now, no question about it.
Right, right. And but back then, this is in the 70s, right? In the 70s, in the 60s, you listened to it. So who were some of the shows back then? I think maybe Bob Fast was on back in the 60s. Abby Hoffman had a show at WBAI, I believe. And that's another thing, Fred. You and I have something in common. I spent a lot of time in Nicaragua in the 80s, and so did you. Went down there with Abby Hoffman, am I right?
I did. I went down to Nicaragua 6 different times. One time with a tour, as it was called, led by Abby Hoffman. Very, very interesting time. And then other times I went down for the New York Post, and I spent time with the Sandinistas, as you did. But I also spent a good deal of time with the Contras, which, as I recall, you did not.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Otherwise, I would be in a grave somewhere in Esteli. So, Fred, for many years, radio. Do you miss radio? I mean, you were the master of radio. I used to listen to you every day, 5 days a week, even though we don't agree on everything. But those 35 years in radio, particularly the ones when you were inside that beautiful plexiglass office at the Post on the 3rd floor. Do you miss those days?
I don't, Randy. I'll tell you why. I mean, I we had some great shows, and I miss having you on, and I miss some of the things that I talked about and the people I had on. But in the final years, and my show ended just a few years ago, in the final years, I became depressed, and I think a lot of listeners became depressed with what had happened to New York State. I mean,
Right.
Andrew Cuomo turned into something of a monster, as you well know. The legislative leadership, the ones that didn't wind up in federal or state prison, turned into second and third rate individuals who had no vision any longer. The bottom line for me was that New York was heading in the wrong direction. I still think it is. And the whole experience soured. It was no longer the experience that had been, or the interesting show I thought that it had been, when the cast of characters were much better and different.
Well, Fred, you really brought a unique perspective up there. I'm a little disappointed in the third floor, as it were, the New York State press. I think that they gave Andrew Cuomo a free ride all of these years, and suddenly now, like many legislators, have jumped ship. But for 10 years there, they basically were cozying up to Andrew Cuomo. Did you find that to be the case?
Increasingly so, yes, Randy. But those 10 years were 10 years of the decline of the print media. I saw reporter after reporter lose his or her job at the Capitol as varying newspapers around the state decided not to bother covering it because they couldn't afford doing so. I mean, the media is in decline, as we know. The loss of positions at the Capitol in the press corps was considerable, about half the people, I would say. And there oftentimes, when there were replacements, they were much younger and inexperienced and non-aggressive reporters. So it was a combination, I think, of the decline of the media and a generational change that brought at the Capitol, as it has in Washington, a lot of younger reporters who don't have the aggressiveness or let me be honest, or the education that reporters who preceded them had had.
Yeah, I don't see too many investigative reporters coming out. There are some good people. I like Zach Fink, but of course you're limited by the parameters that your network or your station sets. There's only so much you can do.
Right, let me also just mention, I mean, there's been a whole cultural change, obviously. When I first came down to the Capitol, which was in the late 1970s, you had still what could be called a sort of Watergate period sensibility down there. Open meetings, freedom of information laws, a commitment by Governor Hugh Carey, Mario Cuomo, to openness. And, Mario Cuomo used to be available to the press almost any time, 4 or 5 times a day. Over the years leading up, finally, to Andrew Cuomo, we had a culture of secrecy, of using the Freedom of Information Law to block access, not to enhance it. We had an Andrew Cuomo who would go for weeks not speaking to the media. You couldn't get to him. So some of the problem is the change in culture, which led to secrecy in government, the likes of which hadn't been seen in modern times. And the press, sadly, was not in a position really to fight it, in my judgment.
Right. We are talking to Fred Dicker, award-winning journalist, my dear friend. I used to work, I think, once a week on Fred Dicker's great show.
It was always a treat.
Fred Dicker live from Albany. I want to get back to Andrew Cuomo now, since you mentioned his name. Look, I thought the press really didn't go after him last year when he made a series of self-promoting. He bungled that entire deal with the nursing homes. I mean, you were on it from the beginning, but you weren't writing. You could only tweet about it. What did you see the lack of duty by the New York press when Andrew Cuomo made those series of mistakes?
Well, I think the press broke the stories about what Cuomo had done, putting COVID positive elderly people back into nursing homes from hospitals, having promulgated requirements on the nursing homes that crippled many of them and led probably to thousands of deaths. And then he covered up the numbers. But we wouldn't have known what was going on if it wasn't for some people in the press. In particular, I think the New York Post did an especially good job with it. So I wouldn't fault the press all that much.
Let me withdraw that. You're right. I'm saying that I think that Andrew Cuomo misled them with those daily Cuomo, what I would call infomercials. I think that he limited the scope of the questioning.
He wouldn't even take questions at times, Randy. As you know, His press conferences were an embarrassment. He used COVID as an excuse not to have any public press conferences. He would require that they be done remotely, and then they would censor or block various questions. They prevented him from being challenged, and his aides were not helpful. Keep in mind, this is one of the things that really infuriated me and still does. Cuomo has around him, as you well know, people who are supposedly press officers, public information officers. They make $150,000 or more a year, and they don't answer any questions. I mean, what the heck is the point of having them? What a disgrace to have positions like that, where their job is basically to hide information, not provide it. So that's another problem. You'd ask the health department for answers on questions. They wouldn't get back to you. You ask Cuomo's people for answers on questions. They either made snide comments or they wouldn't get back to you. That's what the press was dealing with. And of course, that makes it very, very difficult.
But, and then of course, he writes the book, he buries the number. And that doesn't seem to be the big problem with Andrew Cuomo in terms of the legislature looking at him possible impeachment. It's all about the sexual harassment. Do you think that they should broaden the scope and really look at those numbers and the fact that he took money for a book and didn't fudge the numbers?
Not just money, Randy, $5.1 million. I mean, the idea that the governor, who's the highest paid governor in the United States, is supposedly writing a book about how great his handling of the COVID situation was when he had the worst of the second worst record in the nation and cashed in that kind of money and apparently used state workers to do a lot of the work. Not apparently, he did. The question is, did he have them do it on state time or not? That remains to be seen. This is a huge scandal, certainly equal, almost equal to, because it doesn't involve deaths, but equal to what he did in forcing COVID positive elderly into the nursing homes. But it is being looked at. There is a criminal investigation going on from the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Eastern District relating to this. And the Attorney General of New York, Randy, is investigating the question of whether Cuomo used state workers on state time to write that book. If he did, he and those workers could be subject, but especially him, to criminal charges. You may remember Alan Hevesy over a decade ago as our state controller, and he wound up with a criminal conviction, losing his job and eventually going to jail, I believe, or prison, because he merely used a worker, state worker, to drive his wife around. What Cuomo did, if in fact he used state workers on state time, he used them to make $5 million for himself. That's far worse than anything Alan Hevesy did.
Wow. Chuck Schumer back in 1980, when he ran for Congress, he was in the state legislature and he used his own staff to run his campaign, and he was paying them out of state vouchers or something. They referred that the judge, I forgot his name, Deere was his name. He referred it to the
federal judge.
He was not a judge, and he was a U.S. attorney, and referred it to D.C. for criminal investigation. But nothing ever happened. I think it was Arthur Lyman and Rudy Giuliani who somehow were able to bury it at the time. But Cuomo, let's get back to Cuomo. What's in store for him? Is he, a lot of people are talking about him possibly running in a primary. He's got $30 million, I believe, in his campaign.
18.
Well, it was 30 at one time.
Look, he's in huge trouble still. Not only is he humiliated, forced to resign, humiliated his family's name, his mother, his daughters, but he's under at least 3 different investigations, any of which could produce criminal charges against him, Randy. And there's still an ongoing Assembly Committee investigation. That was the basis for possible impeachment, but they're going to be issuing a report on him. Bottom line, he's still in big trouble. I don't see him having any chance for a political comeback. I think he'll be lucky to escape a criminal conviction.
Yeah, well, we know he's a megalomaniac, and sometimes megalomaniacs are in denial, and I'm sure he's trying to figure out a way to resurface. But as you just pointed out, the options are really limited. Do you see?
His own party can't stand him any longer. I mean, what political base does he have left other than maybe some members of his own family, assuming they're still with him? But seriously, the Democrats don't want him anymore. Obviously, the Republicans don't want him. Where could he go? He can't run for office because he has no political base to base it on.
Right. So, I mean, so basically he's finished. And I guess he'll be hanging out with Billy Joel if Joel hasn't kicked him out of his mansion in the Hamptons. Now, how do you assess the coming 2022 gubernatorial race? Is Hochul going to be the nominee, and will Lee Zeldin pose any, real serious contention against her?
Right. Well, the new governor, Kathy Hochul, is from Buffalo and not from New York City. And it's a New York City Democratic primary vote that picks the Democratic statewide candidate. So I think it's going to be very difficult, Randy, for Kathy Hochul to be the Democratic nominee. She's trying to do what she can to win friends down in New York City, hiring New York City political operatives on her state and campaign payrolls. But I think it'll be very difficult for her. Nobody in the Democratic Party really knows who she is. Down in New York City, though, Tish James, the Attorney General, who correctly is credited really with bringing down Andrew Cuomo. That's quite an irony since he picked her to run for Attorney General. She, I think, is the front runner to become the Democratic nominee. There are others who've indicated an interest. Mayor de Blasio, which I think is pretty funny since he's pretty unpopular, but he's indicated he's going to need a job after December. So he's a possibility. The public advocate in New York City is a possibility, and some others may come out. But I think right now, even though Kathy Hochul is the incumbent governor, she's not an elected governor, and I don't think she can win a Democratic primary.
Yeah, the petitioning starts this year early, and the primary is in June. So whoever is planning on running better jump into the race soon. Although
does that mean you're going to be getting in, Randy?
If I did,
you've done it before,
show, Fred. I would lose this show. But who knows? I could, if she's not going to get a primary, maybe I will, just to keep me interested in the entire election season. Any last words, Fred? We got like a minute left. The legacy of, as I said, tomorrow is the 50-year anniversary of Attica. Those decades went by rather quickly. Any last words that you'd like to close with on? I mean, I credit you with the great reporting that you did in the Gannett papers, but just give us some closing thoughts about Attica.
My last words, Randy, I covered 6 governors. I was a journalist with enthusiasm, thinking that my writing could have an impact to make this a better state. I was wrong. I think New York has been on a decline for the last 30 or 40 or 50 years, and I still see it declining, not getting any better. I'm pessimistic about the future of New York.
You are. You're thinking about moving down south, I think, to Florida. But people are leaving. The jobs are hemorrhaging out, and I don't see any recovery upstate anytime soon. I don't know if anybody has an answer. Andrew Cuomo certainly didn't. Any answer he had was met with corruption charges on the people that were associated with him, including Joe Percoco, who still is in jail. Maybe Cuomo will land in there with him on the buddy plan. Anyway.
Never know.
Yeah, well, Fred, listen, it went by too quickly. We got to get you back soon and keep us updated as this very important election comes up next year. Although it may not change anything, I hope that you're available to talk to us. I know you like bluegrass music and you like country bluegrass music. So we're going to go out, being that Bill Kunstler was there back in 1971 at Attica. We're going to close with Big Bad Bill by Leon Redbone. Thanks a lot, Fred, and we'll talk to you soon. See you next week, folks. Oh, not next week, the week after. Next week will be preempted. I'm Randy Credico, live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City. Thank you.
In the town of Louisville lived a man they called Big Bad Bill. I want to tell you, he sure was tough. He certainly did strut that stuff. He had folks scared to death when he walked by. They held their breath. He was a fighting man, sure enough. Now Bill took himself a wife. Guess he leads a different life. Big Bad Bill is sweet William now. Married life has changed him somehow. Here's a man that they all used to fear. Now the people call him Sweet Papa Willie dear. Stronger than Samson, I declare, till the hot mama bobbed his hair. Big Bad Bill don't fight anymore. Washes dishes and he mops up the floor.